London, 1851. The notes drifted through the east wing of Thornfield Hall like ghosts, barely perceptible over the howling autumn wind. It was nearly midnight, and the Duke of Ravenscroft had returned early from his travels abroad, his carriage wheels crunching over gravel as silent as the grave compared to the delicate melody emanating from somewhere within his ancestral home. Miles Farnsworth, the 5th Duke of Ravenscroft, paused in the grand foyer, his travelling cloak still dusted with the evidence of his journey. The servants were not expecting him until the morrow, and the household slept, all except for whoever played that haunting nocturne with such exquisite sorrow. "What phantom has possessed my home?" he murmured, following the sound through darkened corridors illuminated only by the occasional guttering candle. The music grew louder as he approached the disused music room in the east wing, a place that had remained largely undisturbed since his mother's death a decade prior. The door stood slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of warm candlelight to escape into the hallway. Miles pushed it open with deliberate slowness. Seated at his mother's grand piano, a young woman with hair the color of autumn leaves played with closed eyes, her slender fingers dancing across the keys with practiced precision. She wore a simple grey dress, a servant, perhaps, or a companion to his ward. Yet she played with the confidence and skill of a concert pianist, her body swaying gently with the rise and fall of the melody. For several minutes, the Duke remained frozen in the doorway, transfixed by both the music and its mysterious creator. When the final notes faded, the silence hung heavy between them. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked, his deep voice causing the young woman to startle violently from her reverie. She leapt to her feet, knocking the bench backward with a discordant clatter. "Your Grace!" I beg your pardon." "I never meant—" Her wide eyes darted toward the door behind him, clearly calculating her chances of escape. "Please," Miles said, raising a placating hand. "I'm not angry. I merely wish to know who you are and why you're playing my mother's piano at this ungodly hour." The woman curtsied deeply, her gaze fixed firmly on the Turkish carpet. "Winifred Keating, Your Grace. I'm the new music teacher for Lady Sophia." She hesitated. "I apologize for the intrusion. I was told this room was unused." "It was. Until tonight." Miles stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "What was that piece?" "I don't recognize it." Miss Keating's fingers twisted nervously in the folds of her dress. It's my own composition, Your Grace." Miles raised an eyebrow. "Yours?" "Yes, sir. I compose when I cannot sleep." "And do you often suffer from insomnia, Miss Keating?" A shadow passed over her face. "Only when the memories are too persistent to ignore." There was something in her tone, a heaviness that spoke of sorrow beyond her years. Miles found himself intrigued despite his exhaustion. "You play beautifully. My mother would have been pleased to know her piano brings joy to someone again." "Thank you, Your Grace." She glanced toward the door. "I shall not disturb the household again. With your permission, I'll retire." "No," Miles said, surprising himself. "Please, continue. I've been traveling all day, and your music is soothing." Miss Keating's expression shifted from fear to confusion. "You wish me to play?" "Now, if you wouldn't mind." Miles settled into a nearby armchair, suddenly aware of how weary he felt. "Something of your own composition, perhaps." She hesitated only a moment before returning to the bench, straightening it with care before sitting down. "This one is called A Memories of Cornwall," she said softly, and began to play. The melody that filled the room was unlike anything Miles had ever heard, part classical tradition, part wild innovation. It evoked windswept cliffs and turbulent seas, sunshine breaking through storm clouds. He closed his eyes, allowing the music to wash over him like the tide. When he opened them again, the candle had burned lower, and Miss Keating was watching him with an unreadable expression. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "Where did you study?" "My father taught me, Your Grace. He was a music master at a school in Bath before." Her voice faltered. "Before he died. And now you teach my ward." Miles nodded thoughtfully. Lady Sophia never mentioned a new music teacher in her letters. Something flickered in Miss Keating's eyes, alarm, perhaps. "I was engaged only 3 weeks ago by your sister, Lady Helena. Lady Sophia has shown remarkable aptitude already. I look forward to hearing her progress." Miles rose from his chair. "But now, I believe we both should seek our beds. Dawn comes early, and the household will be in an uproar when they discover my premature arrival." Miss Keating stood quickly, curtsying once more. "Good night, Your Grace." As she moved toward the door, Miles found himself reluctant to let her go. "Miss Keating." She turned, her profile illuminated by candlelight. "Yes, Your Grace. You have my permission to use this room whenever you wish. Your talent deserves a proper instrument." For the first time, she smiled, a small, tentative thing that transformed her solemn face. "You are most generous, Your Grace." "Thank you." After she departed, Miles remained in the music room, staring at the piano where faint fingerprints marked the polished surface. There was something about Winifred Keating that didn't quite align with his understanding of what a governess should be. Her bearing, her speech, the quality of her musical education, all suggested breeding far above her station. Miles had not survived nearly a decade managing vast estates and navigating the treacherous waters of London society without developing an instinct for secrets. And Winifred Keating, he was certain, harbored many. Winifred fled to her small bedchamber in the servants' wing, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The Duke had returned early, catastrophically early. She had counted on at least another week to establish herself in the household before facing his scrutiny. She sank onto her narrow bed, pressing trembling hands against her mouth. The Duke had heard her music, her private compositions that no one was ever supposed to hear. Worse, he had been kind about it. Appreciative, even. That made her deception all the more painful. "Compose yourself, Winnie," she whispered, using the childhood nickname no one had called her in years. "Remember why you're here." The letter that had brought her to Thornfield Hall lay hidden beneath the false bottom of her travelling trunk. She didn't need to read it again, its contents were seared into her memory. "My dearest Winifred, I write with news of your father's compositions. Lord Harrington claims they were gifted to him before your father's death, and he intends to publish them under his own name next season. I have confronted him, but without the original manuscripts, we cannot prove their true provenance. There is, however, a ray of hope. Lord Harrington's sister, Lady Helena, is married to the brother of the Duke of Ravenscroft. The family will be gathering at Thornfield Hall next month. If you could somehow secure a position in the household, you might discover where Lord Harrington has hidden the manuscripts. I know this is a terrible imposition, but your father's legacy hangs in the balance. With deepest affection, Mrs. Margaret Winters." Mrs. Winters had been more than her father's colleague, she had been his dearest friend and Winifred's guardian after his death 5 years ago. Winifred could not ignore her plea, even if it meant adopting this elaborate charade. Falsifying references had been surprisingly easy. Claiming to be a music teacher rather than the daughter of the renowned composer Samuel Keating had opened doors that would otherwise have remained firmly shut. Lady Helena, eager to provide her niece with proper accomplishments during her country stay, had hired Winifred without much scrutiny. But now the Duke had returned, and he had heard her play. If he inquired too deeply into her background, everything would unravel. Winifred pressed her fingertips against her temples. One step at a time, she told herself firmly. Lord Harrington arrives in 3 days. Focus on finding those manuscripts. She would simply have to avoid the Duke as much as possible until then. Miles did not consider himself a suspicious man, but the mystery of Miss Keating nagged at him throughout the following morning as he reacquainted himself with the running of Thornfield Hall. Lady Helena engaged her personally, he asked Mrs. Pembroke, the housekeeper, as they reviewed the household ledgers in his study. Yes, Your Grace. Miss Keating came with excellent references from a family in Bath. Very quiet, keeps to herself mostly, except when teaching Lady Sophia. The child has grown quite fond of her. Has she indeed? Miles tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the mahogany desk. And when does my sister arrive from London? Lady Helena and Lord Harrington are expected on Friday, Your Grace, along with several other guests for the autumn shooting party. Miles nodded absently. He had forgotten about the shooting party, another of Helena's schemes to introduce him to eligible young ladies from good families. At 33, he was well aware that he needed to secure the succession, but the parade of simpering débutantes his sister favoured left him cold. I shall inspect the music room before luncheon, he announced, rising from his chair. Please inform Lady Sophia that I wish to hear her progress this afternoon. The music room looked different by daylight, sunlight streaming through the tall windows to illuminate the elegant furnishings that had been shrouded in shadow the night before. Miles ran his hand along the piano's polished surface, remembering how Miss Keating's fingers had drawn such extraordinary sounds from the instrument. A sheet of music had been left on the stand, handwritten notes in a precise, flowing script. Miles studied it with interest, recognizing fragments of the melody she had played. In the margins were small notations, evoke the breaking dawn and remember the tempo of crashing waves. Your Grace. Miles turned to find Miss Keating standing in the doorway, her expression wary. By daylight, he could see that her hair was not simply red but a complex interplay of copper and gold, and her eyes were a clear, intelligent green. She wore another plain grey dress, high-necked and severe, yet it did little to diminish her natural grace. Miss Keating. I was just admiring your composition. A flush crept up her neck. I apologize for leaving it behind. I was startled by your arrival last night. No need for apologies. Miles gestured to the notation. Evoke the breaking dawn. A poetic instruction. Music should paint pictures in the mind, she said, then pressed her lips together as if regretting her candor. A philosophy I share. Miles stepped away from the piano. I've asked Lady Sophia to demonstrate her progress this afternoon. I trust you'll accompany her. Of course, Your Grace. Miss Keating hesitated. Your ward has a natural ear, though she lacks patience for practice. Sophia lacks patience for most things, Miles said dryly. Her mother's temperament, I'm afraid. You've raised her since her parents' death. Yes, these past 5 years. My late cousin made me her guardian. Miles studied Miss Keating's face. You understand something of being orphaned young, I think. Her gaze flickered away. My father died when I was 20. I was fortunate to have had him so long. And your mother? Gone when I was a child. I have few memories of her. Before Miles could inquire further, the door to the music room swung open, and a whirlwind in the form of a 12-year-old girl burst in. Uncle Miles. Mrs. Pembroke said you wished to see me, but I was in the middle of the most fascinating experiment with frogs, and you simply must see what happens when, Sophia, Miles interrupted, suppressing a smile. I see your enthusiasm for natural science continues unabated. Lady Sophia Farnsworth, his ward and second cousin once removed, was a precocious child with unruly dark curls and a perpetual smudge of dirt on her nose, despite the best efforts of her governesses. She skidded to a halt when she noticed Miss Keating. "Oh, are we having a music lesson now? But I haven't practiced today's exercises yet." "I asked to hear your progress," Miles explained. "Miss Keating has been telling me what a natural talent you possess." Sophia wrinkled her nose. "Miss Keating is being kind. I'm dreadful at scales, but she lets me play the fun parts too, not just boring exercises like Miss Grimshaw used to." "Perhaps you could play that Mozart piece we've been working on," Miss Keating suggested gently, "to show His Grace how far you've come." For the next quarter hour, Miles listened as his ward stumbled through a simplified arrangement of Mozart, with Miss Keating offering quiet encouragement and occasional assistance. What struck him most, however, was not Sophia's playing but the way Miss Keating taught, with patience, humour, and a genuine delight in the child's small victories. When Sophia finished with a particularly dramatic flourish, Miles applauded. "Brava! A vast improvement since Christmas, when I believe you declared music's a torture devised by adults to prevent children from having any fun whatsoever." Sophia giggled. "Miss Keating makes it interesting. She tells stories about the composers and what they were thinking when they wrote the music." "Does she indeed?" Miles glanced at the music teacher, who was straightening the sheet music with careful hands. Perhaps Miss Keating would honour us with a demonstration of her own talents. Sophia bounced on the piano bench. "Oh, yes! Play The Tempest, Miss Keating. It's ever so dramatic." "I don't think His Grace would, I insist," Miles said, moving to an armchair. "My ward clearly has excellent taste in repertoire." With visible reluctance, Miss Keating took Sophia's place at the piano. She sat perfectly still for a moment, eyes closed, before her fingers touched the keys. The opening notes were soft, hesitant, like the first raindrops before a storm. Then, without warning, the tempo increased, the dynamic swelled, and the music became a perfect evocation of nature's fury. Miles watched her face as she played, fascinated by the transformation. Gone was the reserved music teacher, in her place was an artist completely immersed in her creation. Her body swayed with the music, her expression shifting from concentration to something approaching ecstasy as the piece reached its climax. When the final chord faded, Sophia broke the silence with enthusiastic applause. "Wasn't that magnificent, Uncle Miles? Miss Keating composed it herself." "Indeed," Miles murmured, his gaze still fixed on Miss Keating's flushed face. "You have an extraordinary gift, Miss Keating." She lowered her eyes. "You're very kind, Your Grace." "Not kind. Honest." Miles rose from his chair. "Sophia, I believe you mentioned something about frogs." His ward leapt up. "Yes. Would you like to see them? I've been keeping detailed observations in my notebook, just as you suggested. Perhaps after luncheon." Miles turned to Miss Keating. "Would you join me in the library this evening, Miss Keating? I have some musical scores that might interest you he collected during my travels." She hesitated, a shadow of something, fear, passing over her features. "I wouldn't wish to impose on your time, Your Grace." "Not at all. 8 o'clock, then." He nodded to her and Sophia before leaving the room, already composing a letter in his mind to his old friend at Oxford who might shed light on the mystery of Winifred Keating. The library at Thornfield Hall was one of the finest private collections in the county, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a magnificent domed ceiling painted with scenes from classical mythology. Winifred arrived precisely at 8, having spent an hour agonizing over whether to accept the Duke's invitation at all. She found him seated at a large desk near the fireplace, writing in a leather-bound journal. He rose when she entered, his height and breadth emphasized by the tailored evening clothes he wore. "Miss Keating, thank you for coming." He gestured toward a table where several leather portfolios were arranged. "I thought these might interest you." Winifred approached cautiously. "What are they?" "Music scores I've collected over the years." The Duke opened one portfolio, revealing pages of handwritten music. "This one contains original works by Mozart, purchased at auction in Vienna." Winifred's breath caught as she recognized the distinctive handwriting. "May I?" she asked, her fingers hovering over the pages. "Please." With reverent care, she turned the pages, marveling at the notations, the corrections, the glimpse into the composer's mind. "These are extraordinary. How did you come to collect them?" "My mother's influence." The Duke moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could detect the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to his clothing. "She was a pianist of some renown before her marriage. After she died, I continued acquiring pieces that I thought would have pleased her." "A lovely tribute," Winifred murmured, trying to focus on the music rather than his proximity. "You remind me of her when you play." His voice was thoughtful. The same passion, the same abandonment to the music. Winifred looked up, startled by the personal observation. "I'm honored by the comparison." It was meant as a compliment. He opened another portfolio. "This might interest you even more. Beethoven's sketches for the Moonlight Sonata." See how he struggled with the third movement. For the next hour, they pored over the collection together, the Duke revealing a depth of musical knowledge that surprised Winifred. He spoke of composers as if they were old friends, discussing their quirks and innovations with genuine enthusiasm. "You understand music far better than most patrons I've encountered," she said at last, closing the final portfolio with reluctance. "Understanding and creating are very different skills." He gestured toward a pair of armchairs near the fire. "Would you care for some tea? Or perhaps something stronger?" The proper response would be to decline, to return to her room and maintain the professional distance expected between a duke and a member of his household staff. Instead, Winifred found herself saying, "Tea would be lovely, thank you." As they settled by the fire, the Duke rang for a servant, who appeared with remarkable speed carrying a tea tray. Once they were alone again, he fixed his penetrating gaze on her face. "Tell me, Miss Keating, why does a woman of your obvious talent and education choose to work as a music teacher in a country house?" Winifred's hand trembled slightly as she accepted the teacup he offered. "Not all talents are rewarded equally, Your Grace. A woman composer is regarded as a curiosity at best, an aberration at worst." "So you have attempted to publish your work?" "My father attempted on my behalf. The publishers were not receptive." "Yet your father was a music master?" "Surely he had some connections in the industry." Winifred's grip tightened on her teacup. The conversation was veering dangerously close to territory she couldn't navigate without lies. He was not well regarded in certain circles. His ideas about music education were considered radical. How fascinating. The Duke's tone suggested he found more than her father's teaching methods worthy of interest. And what were these radical ideas? That music should be accessible to all. That women could compose as well as men. That innovation was as valuable as tradition. The words tumbled out before Winifred could stop them, her father's actual beliefs, which had indeed made him enemies among more conservative musicians. Revolutionary indeed. The Duke sipped his tea. "Tell me, Miss Keating, have you ever heard of Samuel Keating?" The teacup nearly slipped from Winifred's fingers. "I beg your pardon." "Samuel Keating." The Duke's eyes never left her face. "A composer of some note who died several years ago." I was reminded of his work when I heard you play last night. I may have heard the name. Winifred set down her cup with exaggerated care. Why do you ask? Mere curiosity. I own several of his published pieces. His later works, particularly, show remarkable innovation similar to what I heard in your composition. Many composers influence one another, Winifred said faintly. It would be difficult to identify a specific source. Perhaps. The Duke leaned forward slightly. Miss Keating, may I speak frankly? Of course, Your Grace. I believe you are not being entirely truthful about your background. Your musical education, your manner of speech, your entire bearing suggests someone raised in circumstances far different from what you've described. Winifred felt the blood drain from her face. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. His voice remained gentle, despite the accusation. I'm not asking you to confess anything. I merely wish you to know that whatever your reasons for concealing your true identity, you will find me a sympathetic audience should you choose to share them. Before Winifred could formulate a response, the library door opened, and a footman appeared. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but an urgent message has arrived from London. The Duke rose. Excuse me, Miss Keating. We shall continue this conversation another time. Winifred watched him cross the room, her mind racing. He suspected her deception, but how much did he know? And what would he do with that knowledge? She slipped from the library while he was engaged with the messenger, hurrying back to her small room where she could think in private. The Duke's interest in her was a complication she hadn't anticipated. If he discovered her true purpose at Thornfield Hall before she could recover her father's manuscripts. Winifred sank onto her bed, pressing her hands against her eyes. She had 3 days until Lord Harrington arrived. 3 days to decide whether to trust the Duke with the truth or to continue this increasingly precarious charade. She thought of how the Duke had looked at her as she played, not with the condescension she had grown accustomed to, but with genuine appreciation. For the first time in years, someone had truly heard her music. Focus, Winifred, she scolded herself. You're here for your father's legacy, not to impress a duke with your compositions. Yet as she prepared for bed, she couldn't help remembering the warmth in the Duke's eyes, the respectful way he had discussed music with her, treating her as an equal despite the vast gulf in their social positions. It was a dangerous path her thoughts were taking, one that could lead only to greater heartbreak when her deception was finally revealed. The following morning brought steady rain, confining the household indoors. Miles used the opportunity to catch up on estate business, though his thoughts repeatedly strayed to Miss Keating. Her reaction when he mentioned Samuel Keating had confirmed his suspicions. There was a connection there, one she was desperate to conceal. A knock at his study door interrupted his reverie. Enter, he called, expecting his secretary with the quarterly accounts. Instead, Lady Sophia bounced in, followed more sedately by Miss Keating, who appeared distinctly uncomfortable. Uncle Miles, it's raining buckets, and Miss Keating said we might ask if we could use the portrait gallery for our music history lesson because the acoustics are excellent for demonstrating different periods of musical development. Sophia delivered this speech in one breathless rush, beaming hopefully. Miles suppressed a smile. Did she indeed? And what does this music history lesson entail? Miss Keating is going to play examples from different eras and explain how music evolved, and then I'm going to try some of the techniques myself, and it's ever so much more interesting than just reading about it in books. A practical demonstration seems entirely sensible. Miles turned to Miss Keating. The portrait gallery is at your disposal, though I warn you that my ancestors are harsh critics. Thank you, Your Grace. Miss Keating kept her gaze fixed somewhere over his left shoulder. We won't disturb your work. Actually, I think I'll join you." Miles rose from his desk, noting the flash of alarm in her eyes. "I could use a respite from these ledgers, and I've always enjoyed a good music history lesson." Sophia clapped her hands. "Splendid! I'll run ahead and make sure the piano is uncovered." She darted from the room before either adult could respond. Alone with Miss Keating, Miles allowed himself a moment to appreciate how the grey light from the window softened her features, lending her an ethereal quality. "You needn't accompany us, Your Grace," she said stiffly. "I'm sure your business is pressing." "Not as pressing as my curiosity about your teaching methods." Miles moved toward the door, holding it open for her. "After you, Miss Keating." The portrait gallery ran the length of the West Wing, its walls adorned with generations of Farnsworths in varying styles of portraiture. At the far end stood a smaller piano than the one in the music room, positioned to catch the afternoon light. Sophia was already seated on the bench, experimentally pressing keys. "Miss Keating says this piano is from Mozart's time." "Is that true, Uncle Miles?" "Indeed. My great-grandfather purchased it during his grand tour." Miles settled into a chair nearby. "Please don't let me interrupt your lesson." For the next hour, he watched as Miss Keating transformed from the guarded woman who had entered his study into an animated, passionate teacher. She played excerpts from different musical periods, explaining the evolution of harmony and form in terms a 12-year-old could grasp. She encouraged Sophia to identify patterns, to feel the different emotional qualities of major and minor keys, to understand music as a language with its own grammar and vocabulary. Most remarkably, she had Sophia laughing as she learned, no small feat with a child whose previous governesses had all complained of her restlessness and inattention. "Now," Miss Keating said, after demonstrating a simple Baroque dance, "why don't you try composing a short melody in this style? Remember the characteristics we discussed." As Sophia bent over the keyboard, her face scrunched in concentration, Miss Keating glanced toward Miles. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and he saw in hers a flash of the same passion that animated her playing, a love for music so profound it transcended all artifice. He smiled, and after a heartbeat's hesitation, she smiled back, a genuine expression that transformed her face completely. The moment was broken when Sophia triumphantly played her composition, a credible, if simplistic, minuet. "Excellent!" Miss Keating praised. "You've captured the style perfectly. Now, shall we move forward in time to the classical period?" The lesson continued, with Miles occasionally asking questions that Sophia delighted in answering. By the time they reached the Romantic era, the rain had stopped, and sunshine streamed through the tall windows. "I believe that's enough for today," Miss Keating said, noticing Sophia's increasing fidgeting. "Perhaps you'd like to run outside now that the weather has cleared." "May I, Uncle Miles? I want to see if the rain has brought out any interesting insects by the lake." "You may, but change into appropriate boots first. Mrs. Pembroke will have my head if you ruin another pair." Sophia dashed off, leaving Miles alone with Miss Keating once more. She immediately began gathering the sheet music they had used, her movements betraying her nervousness. "You're a remarkable teacher," Miles said, rising from his chair. "I've never seen Sophia so engaged in a lesson." "Thank you, Your Grace. She has a quick mind when her interest is captured. A trait she shares with her guardian, perhaps." Miles moved closer to the piano. "I find my own interest thoroughly captured by you, Miss Keating." She froze, music sheets clutched to her chest. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Miles took the sheets gently from her hands, setting them on the piano. "Last night in the library, you spoke of your father's radical ideas about music education, ideas remarkably similar to those published by Samuel Keating in his treatise On Modern Approaches to Musical Instruction." Winifred's face paled. You've read it? I own a copy. It was controversial when published, but my mother thought it brilliant. Miles held her gaze steadily. Your father was Samuel Keating, wasn't he? For a long moment, she said nothing, her internal struggle visible in her eyes. Then, barely audible, yes. And you are not simply his daughter who teaches music. You're Winifred Keating, the composer whose works were published under her father's name to avoid prejudice against female composers. Her eyes widened in shock. How could you possibly know that? I didn't, until this moment. Miles smiled at her stunned expression. But I suspected. The style of your original compositions is distinctly recognizable in the later works attributed to Samuel Keating, works published after his death, I believe. After his death, Winifred echoed faintly. Yes. What I don't understand is why you're here, posing as a simple music teacher, when you could be in London publishing under your own name now that the secret is out. Winifred sank onto the piano bench, her composure finally cracking. Because the secret isn't out. And my father's unpublished manuscripts, our manuscripts, have been stolen. Stolen? By whom? Lord Harrington. She looked up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. He claims my father gifted them to him before his death, but it's a lie. He intends to publish them under his own name next season. Lord Harrington. Miles's voice hardened. My brother-in-law. Yes. Winifred twisted her hands in her lap. I came here hoping to find evidence, to locate the manuscripts before he can complete his theft. And you didn't think to approach me directly with this accusation. A penniless music teacher accusing a peer of the realm of intellectual theft. Winifred gave a bitter laugh. Who would believe me? I needed proof. Miles paced the length of the piano, his mind racing. Lord Harrington arrives tomorrow with my sister. You plan to search his belongings. If necessary. Winifred lifted her chin. I won't apologize for trying to protect my father's legacy, our legacy. Nor should you. Miles stopped pacing. But there are more effective methods than skulking about as a governess. Methods I can help you implement. Winifred stared at him. Why would you help me? Lord Harrington is your family by marriage. That connection means little compared to the principles at stake. Miles sat beside her on the piano bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Besides, I find I have a vested interest in seeing justice done for a composer whose work I greatly admire, both the father's and the daughter's. Winifred studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. If you're toying with me, I assure you, Miss Keating, my interest is entirely genuine. Miles held her gaze. In both your music and its creator. A flush crept up her neck at his words. What do you propose? First, we need more information. How certain are you that Lord Harrington has the manuscripts? My father's colleague, Mrs. Winters, confronted him directly. He didn't deny possession, only claimed they were given freely. And these manuscripts, would they be easily identifiable as your father's work? Yes. They're in his distinctive hand, with his seal on each composition. And she hesitated. The later works contain margin notes in my handwriting, where we collaborated. Excellent. That gives us something concrete to search for. Miles rose from the bench. Leave this to me for now. Continue your lessons with Sophia as if nothing has changed. When Lord Harrington arrives, observe but do not engage him directly. You have a plan? The beginnings of one. Miles offered his hand to help her rise. Trust me, Miss Keating. Your father's legacy, and yours, will be restored. She placed her hand in his, allowing him to draw her to her feet. I've trusted very few people since my father died. Then I am honored to be among their number. Miles held her hand a moment longer than necessary. Your secret is safe with me, as is your true purpose here. But I would ask one favor in return. What is it? Play for me again tonight. Not as the music teacher, but as Winifred Keating, composer. Her expression softened. I would be honored, Your Grace. Miles, he said quietly. When we are alone, I would prefer you use my name. Miles, she repeated, the word sounding like a melody on her lips. That evening, after the household had retired, Winifred made her way to the music room where the Duke Miles awaited her. The great room was illuminated only by firelight and a few well-placed candles, creating an intimate atmosphere that made her heart beat faster. I wasn't certain you would come, he said, rising from his chair as she entered. I gave my word. Winifred moved to the piano, trailing her fingers lightly over the keys. What would you like to hear? Something new. Something no one else has heard. Winifred nodded, settling onto the bench. She had spent the afternoon composing, the melody flowing from her fingers as if possessed by some external force. Now she played it for the first time, allowing the music to speak what she could not say aloud, her fear, her hope, her growing feelings for a man so far above her station that any attachment could only end in heartbreak. The piece began tentatively, a question posed in delicate notes that gradually gained strength and conviction. It built toward a passionate climax before resolving into a gentle conclusion that echoed the opening theme, transformed by its journey. When she finished, the silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. Winifred kept her eyes on the keys, afraid of what she might see in his face. You composed that today? Miles asked, his voice unusually rough. Yes. What do you call it? Winifred hesitated. The title had come to her as she wrote the final measures, but she dared not speak it aloud. It doesn't have a name yet. Miles moved to stand beside the piano, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cool room. I think it does. I think you're simply afraid to tell me. She looked up then, meeting his gaze. Why should I fear you? Not me. The truth of what you feel. He extended his hand. Come. Sit with me by the fire. Winifred allowed him to lead her to a small sofa positioned near the hearth. The intimacy of their position, alone, at night, sitting closer than propriety allowed, should have alarmed her. Instead, she felt a strange calm, as if they had stepped outside the normal rules that governed their separate worlds. Tomorrow Lord Harrington arrives, Miles said, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. I've made arrangements to search his belongings while he is occupied with the shooting party. If your father's manuscripts are among his possessions, we will find them. And if we do, then we confront him with evidence in hand. My position as his host, his brother-in-law, and a duke makes it difficult for him to dismiss the accusation outright. He'll claim I forged the evidence. Perhaps. But I've taken precautions against that as well. Miles smiled slightly. I've invited Mrs. Margaret Winters to join our house party. Winifred gasped. Mrs. Winters? Here? She arrives the day after tomorrow. Lord Harrington will find it difficult to maintain his lie with both of you present, especially with me as your advocate. You've thought of everything. Not everything. Miles's expression grew serious. I haven't yet determined how to ensure your compositions receive the recognition they deserve going forward. The prejudice against female composers remains strong. I've accepted that my work may never bear my name. Winifred stared into the fire. It was enough that my father believed in my talent, that he was willing to share his reputation to give my music life. It shouldn't be enough. Miles took her hand, his touch sending warmth through her veins. Your music deserves to be heard, Winifred. And the world deserves to know its true creator. She looked down at their joined hands. Why do you care so much about this? About me? Because from the moment I heard you playing in this room, I recognized something extraordinary. Not just your talent, but your soul expressed through your music. His voice dropped lower. I've spent my life surrounded by people performing the role society assigned them. You're the first person I've met who creates something genuinely, authentically her own. Even though I came here under false pretenses. You came here to right a wrong. There's honor in that, despite the deception. Winifred withdrew her hand gently. This cannot end well, Miles. Even if we recover the manuscripts, even if Lord Harrington is exposed, I remain a music teacher without fortune or family connections. And you remain a duke. Is that all we are? Titles and positions. In the eyes of the world, yes. Miles reached out, his fingers brushing a stray curl from her cheek. Then perhaps we should stop concerning ourselves with the world's eyes. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Winifred knew she should withdraw, maintain the distance their stations demanded. Instead, she found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force as irresistible as the pull of music itself. The clock in the hall struck midnight, breaking the spell. Winifred stood abruptly. I should go. Tomorrow will be challenging. Miles rose more slowly. Indeed. But remember, you are not facing it alone. Thank you. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at him. The piece I played tonight, its title is What Cannot Be Spoken. Before he could respond, she slipped from the room, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird seeking freedom. Lord Harrington arrived the following afternoon in a carriage laden with trunks and accompanied by Lady Helena, the Duke's younger sister. Winifred observed their arrival from an upstairs window, studying the man who had stolen her father's legacy. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with fashionably arranged dark hair and the languid movements of a man accustomed to privilege. As he descended from the carriage, he clapped Miles on the shoulder with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. Lady Helena embraced her brother warmly before turning to survey the assembled household staff. Her gaze passed over Winifred without recognition, just another servant in a sea of faces. Winifred retreated to the music room, where Sophia was practicing her scales with unusual diligence. Very good, she praised, taking a seat beside the piano. Your uncle will be impressed by your progress. Do you think so? Sophia brightened. I practiced extra this morning. I want to play for the guests at dinner. That's a lovely idea. What piece were you thinking of performing? As Sophia launched into a detailed description of her planned repertoire, Winifred's mind wandered to Miles and his scheme to search Lord Harrington's belongings. It was risky. If discovered, the scandal would be enormous. A duke accused of searching a guest's private effects would face serious social consequences, regardless of the justification. Miss Keating? Are you listening? Winifred forced her attention back to her pupil. I'm sorry, Sophia. My thoughts wandered. What were you saying? I asked if you would play a duet with me. It would sound ever so much better with your part included. Of course. Winifred moved to sit beside Sophia on the bench. From the beginning, then. They were still practicing when the door opened, admitting Miles, Lady Helena, and Lord Harrington. Winifred's fingers faltered on the keys, but she recovered quickly, finishing the phrase before stopping. "Don't cease on our account," Lady Helena said, smiling warmly at Sophia. "We heard the music from the hall and simply had to investigate." Sophia jumped up to embrace her aunt. "Did you hear me playing, Aunt Helena? Miss Keating has been teaching me, and Uncle Miles says I've improved enormously." "Indeed you have," Miles affirmed, his gaze briefly meeting Winifred's. "Miss Keating has proven an exceptional teacher." Lord Harrington stepped forward, his attention fixed on Winifred with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Miss Keating, is it? I don't believe we've been introduced." "Miss Keating is Sophia's new music instructor," Lady Helena explained. "I engaged her last month on Mrs. Pembroke's recommendation." "How fortunate for Thornfield Hall." Lord Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I have some interest in music myself, you know. Perhaps we might discuss the subject further during my stay." "Miss Keating's duties keep her quite occupied," Miles interjected smoothly, "though we are all benefiting from her talent. She's been kind enough to play for me in the evenings. Her original compositions are quite remarkable." Lord Harrington's expression sharpened. "Original compositions? How intriguing. I'd be most interested to hear them." "Perhaps another time," Miles said, his tone brooking no argument. "I believe the rest of our guests have begun to arrive, Helena. We should greet them." As the trio departed, Winifred released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Lord Harrington's interest had been too keen, his gaze too calculating. Did he suspect her true identity? "Miss Keating, are you unwell?" Sophia asked, peering at her face. "You've gone quite pale." "Just a momentary headache." Winifred forced a smile. "Shall we continue our practice?" Throughout the remainder of the lesson, Winifred found herself listening for footsteps in the corridor, half expecting Lord Harrington to return. When Sophia finally departed for her afternoon lessons with the governess, Winifred remained at the piano, her fingers moving restlessly over the keys without producing sound. "He recognized your name." Winifred startled at Miles's voice. He stood in the doorway, his expression grave. "Is it so obvious?" she asked. "To me, yes. Harrington mentioned your name specifically over luncheon, inquiring about your background and how long you've been at Thornfield." Miles entered the room, closing the door behind him. "He knows something, or at least suspects." "What did you tell him?" "That you came highly recommended for your discretion and talent, and that your previous employment is none of his concern." Miles's mouth curved in a wry smile. The privileges of being host and duke, one can be remarkably rude under the guise of protecting one's household. "He'll be watching me now." "Which may work to our advantage. While he's occupied observing you, he'll be less attentive to his belongings." Miles lowered his voice. "His valet is settling him in the East Wing. I've arranged for a small accident with the plumbing that will necessitate moving his trunks temporarily to an adjacent room, one to which I have access." "When?" "This evening, during dinner. You'll need to be present at the table to maintain appearances." Winifred blanched. "At dinner?" "With the family. As Sophia's music teacher, it's not unprecedented, especially as she wishes to perform after the meal." Miles must have read the panic in her expression, for he added gently, "I'll be there. You needn't fear Harrington's scrutiny. It's not just Lord Harrington I fear." Winifred rose from the piano bench, smoothing her plain dress with nervous hands. "I don't belong at a duke's dinner table, Miles. I have nothing suitable to wear. I don't know the proper etiquette. Nonsense. You are the daughter of Samuel Keating, a respected composer. Your education and breeding are impeccable." Miles stepped closer. As for suitable attire, I've taken the liberty of having one of my sister's gowns altered for you. Helena is close to your height, if somewhat fuller in figure." "You what?" Winifred stared at him in disbelief. "Miles, that's completely inappropriate." "I can't accept. You can, and you will." His tone softened. "Consider it a loan, not a gift if your pride demands it. But I need you at that table tonight, Winifred. Not hiding in the shadows." She wanted to argue further, but the determination in his eyes made it clear he would not yield. "Very well. But I maintain this is madness." "Perhaps." Miles smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. "But it's a madness I find increasingly appealing." The gown that arrived in Winifred's room was more magnificent than anything she had worn since her father's death forced her into reduced circumstances. Made of deep emerald silk that complemented her coloring perfectly, it featured delicate lace at the neckline and sleeves, with subtle embroidery enhancing the bodice. The maid Miles had sent to assist her arranged Winifred's copper hair in an elegant style, pinned with small pearl combs that had mysteriously appeared alongside the dress. When Winifred finally gathered the courage to look in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the plain music teacher in her severe grey dress. In her place stood a woman who might, in different circumstances, have moved comfortably in aristocratic circles, or a woman who looked worthy of a duke's attention. Dangerous thoughts, Winifred murmured to her reflection. Focus on the manuscripts, not the man. The dinner party included 12 guests besides the family, local gentry and several visitors from London for the shooting season. Winifred entered the drawing room with trepidation, immediately conscious of the curious glances directed her way. Miles crossed the room to greet her, his appreciative gaze making her cheeks warm. "Miss Keating, you look enchanting." "Thank you, Your Grace," she replied formally, aware of the watching eyes. "Though I feel rather out of place." "Nonsense. You belong exactly where you are." He offered his arm. "Allow me to introduce you to our guests." For the next quarter hour, Winifred was swept through a series of introductions, clinging to her composure by the thinnest of threads. Most of the guests were polite if puzzled by the music teacher's elevation to dinner guest. Lord Harrington, however, watched her with naked suspicion, especially after Miles mentioned that Winifred would be performing after dinner. "I look forward to it immensely," Lord Harrington said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I have a particular interest in new musical talents." "As do we all," Miles replied smoothly, steering Winifred away before she could respond. At dinner, Winifred found herself seated between a jovial country squire and a quiet, scholarly gentleman who, after ascertaining her interest in music, engaged her in a fascinating discussion of the emerging romantic movement in Germany. The conversation flowed more easily than she had feared, and she began to relax slightly. Until Lord Harrington, seated directly across from her, leaned forward. "Tell me, Miss Keating, are you by any chance related to the composer Samuel Keating?" The table fell silent, all eyes turning to Winifred. She set down her fork with deliberate care. "May I ask why you inquire, my lord?" "Mere curiosity. I am an admirer of his work and noticed a similarity in your surnames." "It's a common enough name," Winifred replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Though I am familiar with his compositions." "Indeed?" Lord Harrington's eyes narrowed. "His later works, particularly, show remarkable innovation, almost as if written by a different hand entirely." Miles intervened before Winifred could respond. "I wasn't aware you were such a music scholar, Harrington. Your interests have always seemed more physical in nature. Hunting, racing, and the like. One contains multitudes, Ravenscroft." Lord Harrington smiled thinly. "My interest in Keating's work is relatively recent, but most sincere. How fascinating. Miles turned to Lady Helena. Speaking of recent interests, sister, I understand you've taken up watercolours again. The conversation shifted, but Winifred could feel Lord Harrington's gaze upon her throughout the remainder of the meal. When at last the ladies withdrew to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their port, she nearly sagged with relief. Lady Helena approached her immediately. Miss Keating, I must compliment you on your gown. The colour suits you admirably. Thank you, my lady. It was most generous of you to loan it. Helena's brow furrowed slightly. Loan it? Oh. Yes, of course. Think nothing of it. I'm delighted it fits so well. Her confusion confirmed what Winifred had suspected. Miles had not consulted his sister about the dress. It was an entirely new purchase, selected specifically for Winifred. The realization sent a flutter of something dangerous through her chest. Before she could dwell on it further, the gentleman rejoined them, and Sophia bounced to the pianoforte, eager to demonstrate her progress. Winifred moved to assist her, grateful for the distraction. Sophia performed creditably, if with more enthusiasm than precision, earning warm applause from the assembled guests. Then all eyes turned expectantly to Winifred. We've been promised a treat, Miss Keating, Lady Helena called. My brother speaks most highly of your compositions. With no choice but to comply, Winifred took Sophia's place at the instrument. She hesitated only briefly before launching into one of her father's most beloved pieces, a composition that was, in fact, entirely her own work, published under his name shortly before his death. As she played, she was acutely aware of Lord Harrington's intense scrutiny. When the final notes faded, his was the first voice to break the appreciative silence. Remarkable interpretation, Miss Keating. Almost as if you understand the composer's intentions intimately. Music speaks to those who listen properly, my lord, she replied, rising from the bench. Indeed it does. Lord Harrington moved toward her, his expression calculating. I wonder if you might play something else? Perhaps something original. Before she could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew everyone's attention. Mrs. Pembroke appeared at the drawing-room door, her usually composed features distressed. Begging your pardon, your grace, but there's been an accident with the plumbing in the east wing. Lord Harrington's room is affected, and we need to move his belongings immediately. Lord Harrington frowned. My belongings? I should oversee this myself. No need, Miles interjected smoothly. Mrs. Pembroke is most efficient, and your valet is already assisting. Please, continue enjoying the music. Miss Keating was about to favour us with another piece. For a moment, Lord Harrington seemed torn between suspicion and social obligation. Finally, he inclined his head. Very well. But I insist on inspecting the damage afterward. Of course. Miles turned to Winifred. Miss Keating. With Lord Harrington's gaze boring into her back, Winifred returned to the piano. This time, she chose a piece she had composed only the previous week, one that expressed all the turbulent emotion she had experienced since arriving at Thornfield Hall. As she played, she sent a silent prayer that Miles would find what they sought in Lord Harrington's possessions. The evening seemed interminable, but finally the guests began to retire, pleading fatigue after their journeys. Lord Harrington was among the last to leave, his departure delayed by a lengthy inspection of his temporarily relocated belongings. Winifred lingered in the drawing-room, pretending to arrange sheet music while waiting for some sign from Miles. When at last the room emptied, she sank onto a settee, her nerves stretched to breaking point. She had nearly decided to retire when Miles appeared, closing the door firmly behind him. His expression was unreadable as he crossed the room to stand before her. Well, she asked, unable to bear the suspense. "Did you find them?" In answer, Miles reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded sheet of paper. He handed it to her without comment. Winifred unfolded it with trembling fingers, instantly recognizing her father's handwriting and in the margins her own annotations. It was a page from their final collaboration, a concerto they had completed just weeks before his death. "There's more," Miles said quietly. "An entire portfolio hidden in a false bottom of his travelling desk. At least 20 compositions, all bearing your father's seal, and many with your handwriting in the margins." Relief flooded through Winifred, so intense she felt lightheaded. "You found them? You actually found them?" "I did." Miles sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "But that's not all I discovered." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "What do you mean?" "There were letters, Winifred. Correspondence between your father and Lord Harrington, spanning several years." Miles's expression darkened. "It seems Harrington was not merely stealing your father's work, he was blackmailing him." "Blackmailing? Over what?" "Over you." Miles squeezed her hand gently. "Your father's decision to publish your compositions under his name violated no law, but it would have created a scandal if revealed, one that might have destroyed both your reputations and ended your chances of future publication. Harrington discovered the truth somehow and used it to extort your father." Winifred felt the blood drain from her face. "That's why father was so distressed in his final months. He never told me. I thought it was just his illness." "From the correspondence, it appears your father refused Harrington's final demand, which was for all his unpublished works, including yours. He died before Harrington could increase the pressure. And after his death, Harrington simply took them anyway, claiming they were a gift." Winifred's shock gave way to anger. "That contemptible, dishonorable, precisely my assessment." Miles's jaw tightened. "I've secured the manuscripts and letters in my private safe. Tomorrow, when Mrs. Winters arrives, we will confront him together. He'll deny everything. It will be our word against his. A duke's word, supported by physical evidence, carries significant weight. And I've taken one additional precaution." Miles's expression lightened slightly. "I've invited Sir William Thornton to join us tomorrow." "The publisher?" Winifred's eyes widened. "Why would he come?" "Because I hinted that I had discovered a musical treasure of considerable value that I wished his expert opinion on." Miles smiled. "Sir William and I were at Oxford together. He's always had a keen ear for talent and an even keener nose for profit." "You mean to have him publish the manuscripts?" "Under their true composer's name, or names, as the case may be." Miles released her hands, rising to pace the room. It's time the world knew the truth about Winifred Keating. Winifred stood as well, her mind racing. This could ruin Lord Harrington socially. He should have considered that before committing blackmail and theft. Miles turned to face her. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No." Winifred squared her shoulders. "My father deserves justice, and so do I. But this could reflect badly on your family. Lady Helena, my sister, will survive the embarrassment. She's made more questionable choices than her husband." Miles moved closer. "The only opinion I'm concerned with is yours, Winifred." "Mine?" "Yes." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with extraordinary gentleness. "Because in the course of recovering your legacy, I've made a discovery of far greater personal significance." Winifred's heart began a rapid tattoo against her ribs. "What discovery?" "That I have never met a woman who fascinates me as completely as you do." Miles's eyes held hers, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. Your talent, your courage, your determination, they've awakened something in me I thought long buried beneath duty and position. Miles, you can't possibly. I can. I do. His hand cupped her cheek fully now. I know it's sudden. I know the world will say it's impossible. But when I hear you play, when I see the passion in your eyes, I recognize a kindred spirit, someone who understands that true worth lies not in titles or fortunes, but in what we create, in how we touch others' lives. Winifred wanted to believe him, wanted it with an intensity that frightened her. But years of disappointment had taught her caution. The gulf between us is vast, Miles. I am still the daughter of a music teacher, regardless of my father's talent or my own. And I am still simply a man, regardless of my title. Miles took her hands again, his grip warm and steady. The question is not whether society will approve, but whether you could ever return my feelings. Whether you might consider a future that neither of us anticipated when you first played my mother's piano at midnight. The reference to their first meeting brought a smile to Winifred's lips despite her misgivings. I thought you were a ghost, you know. Standing there in the doorway, watching me play. And I thought you were a dream. Miles's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. A beautiful dream I never wanted to wake from. Miles. Winifred began, not certain what she meant to say. She never had to decide, for at that moment, the drawing-room door burst open, revealing Lord Harrington. His face was flushed with anger, his usually immaculate appearance dishevelled. "Where are they?" he demanded, striding into the room. "What have you done with my papers, Ravenscroft?" Miles released Winifred's hands but remained close to her side. "I don't know what you mean, Harrington." "What papers?" "Don't play innocent with me. My manuscript portfolio is missing, and your servants have been interfering with my belongings all evening." Lord Harrington's gaze shifted to Winifred, his expression darkening further. "Or perhaps Miss Keating is responsible. After all, she has a particular interest in certain compositions." "I beg your pardon." Winifred kept her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Drop the pretense, Miss Keating. Or should I call you Miss Winifred Keating, daughter of Samuel Keating and the true composer of half his published works?" Lord Harrington's smile was cruel. "Oh yes, I know exactly who you are. I knew from the moment Helena mentioned a new music teacher named Keating." Miles stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Winifred. "That's quite enough, Harrington. Whatever dispute you have can be addressed in the morning after you've composed yourself. I want my property returned immediately." "Your property?" Miles's tone hardened. "I think you mean Samuel Keating's property, stolen through blackmail and deceit." Lord Harrington's expression flickered, surprise momentarily replacing anger before his features settled into cold calculation. "I see. So the Duke and the music teacher have been conspiring together. How romantic. And how utterly scandalous it will be when I inform the world that the great Duke of Ravenscroft has been conducting an illicit affair with his ward's governess." "That's absurd," Winifred protested. "There has been no impropriety, hasn't there?" Lord Harrington's gaze raked over her, lingering on her elaborate gown. The daughter of a middling composer, suddenly dressed in silk and dining with the gentry. Performing private concerts for his grace at midnight? The gossips will feast for months. Miles took another step forward, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. "You forget yourself, Harrington. You are a guest in my home, and you will conduct yourself accordingly or face the consequences." "What consequences could possibly be worse than what I already face?" Lord Harrington laughed bitterly. "You've stolen my chance at musical immortality. My reputation as a composer was to be my legacy, the one thing that would outlast the gambling debts and failed investments. A reputation built on theft is no legacy at all, Miles said quietly. Return to your room, Harrington. In the morning, we will discuss terms that may allow you to salvage some dignity from this situation. For a moment, it seemed Lord Harrington might refuse. Then, with a final venomous glance at Winifred, he turned on his heel and stalked from the room. As the door closed behind him, Winifred released a shaky breath. He knows everything. And he's desperate. Miles turned to her, his expression grave. You should not be alone tonight. I'll have Mrs. Pembroke arrange for a maid to stay in your room. You think he might harm me? I think a desperate man is capable of desperate actions. Miles ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. I've never seen him like this. The gambling debts he mentioned must be more serious than Helena realized. What will happen tomorrow? We proceed as planned. Mrs. Winters will arrive, along with Sir William. We present the evidence, including the letters documenting the blackmail. Harrington will have little choice but to concede, especially once Sir William expresses interest in publishing the recovered works under your name. Winifred nodded slowly. And then? Miles's expression softened. And then, Winifred Keating, you begin your life as a recognized composer. Your father's legacy, and yours, secured at last. And us? The question slipped out before she could stop it. What becomes of whatever this is between us? Miles took her hands again, his grip firm and warm. That depends entirely on you. My feelings will not change, regardless of the outcome with Harrington. But I would understand if you wish to focus on your music, on building the career you've been denied for so long. I've spent years hiding in shadows, Miles. Concealing my talent, my ambitions, even my identity. Winifred met his gaze steadily. I don't want to hide anymore. Not my music, and not my heart. Miles's smile transformed his face, years of reserve melting away. Then we face tomorrow together, and all the tomorrows that follow. As he bent to press his lips gently against hers, their first kiss, sweet and filled with promise, Winifred knew that whatever challenges awaited them, her music would never again be played in silence. Bright sunshine streamed through the windows of Thornfield Hall's library the following afternoon as Miles stood before the assembled party, Lord Harrington, pale but composed, Lady Helena, confusion evident in her furrowed brow, Mrs. Winters, a stately woman in her 60s whose sharp eyes missed nothing, Sir William Thornton, portly and jovial, and Winifred, dressed simply but elegantly in a blue gown Miles had commissioned alongside the emerald silk. Thank you all for joining me, Miles began, his tone formal. I've called this gathering to address a matter of significant artistic and legal importance. Lord Harrington shifted in his chair but remained silent, his expression carefully neutral. He had approached Miles at breakfast, attempting to negotiate privately, but Miles had been adamant that the resolution must include all affected parties. Several days ago, I discovered that my household harbored an exceptional talent, the composer whose work rivals that of the most celebrated masters. Miles gestured toward Winifred. Miss Keating demonstrated skill that immediately reminded me of the late Samuel Keating, whose innovative compositions I have long admired. Mrs. Winters nodded approvingly, while Sir William leaned forward with increased interest. Through subsequent conversations, I learned that Miss Keating is, in fact, the daughter of Samuel Keating, and, more significantly, the true composer of many works published under her father's name. Lady Helena gasped. But that's extraordinary. Why would such an arrangement be necessary? Because female composers are rarely taken seriously, particularly when they innovate beyond established forms, Mrs. Winters interjected firmly. Samuel and I discussed this at length. He believed his daughter's genius deserved an audience, even if it meant sheltering her behind his name temporarily. Miles continued. What no one anticipated was that this secret would be discovered and exploited. Very well. Miles retrieved a leather portfolio from his desk. In this folder are letters exchanged between Samuel Keating and Lord Harrington, documenting a systematic campaign of blackmail. Harrington threatened to expose the truth about Winifred's compositions, potentially destroying both Keating's reputations in the musical community. That's absurd, Lady Helena protested, looking to her husband. Robert would never, I assure you, my lady, he did. Mrs. Winters's voice was heavy with old anger. I witnessed Samuel's distress firsthand, though he never revealed the blackmailer's identity to me. Miles opened the portfolio, extracting several letters. After Samuel Keating's death, Lord Harrington seized possession of numerous unpublished manuscripts, works created jointly by father and daughter, and some composed entirely by Winifred. He claimed they were gifted to him, intending to publish them under his own name. Sir William Thornton's eyebrows shot upward. Most irregular, Harrington. Most irregular indeed. Lord Harrington finally spoke, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. You cannot possibly understand the circumstances, Ravenscroft. My financial situation does not justify theft or blackmail, Miles interrupted firmly. However, I am prepared to offer a solution that may salvage something for all parties. He turned to Sir William. You came here today because I promised you a musical discovery of significance. These manuscripts represent that discovery, the unknown works of Samuel Keating, and the debut compositions of his daughter, Winifred Keating, whose talent you heard for yourself last evening. Sir William nodded enthusiastically. Most impressive, indeed. The young lady plays with remarkable passion and originality. My proposal is this: you publish these works under their true creators' names, with appropriate credit divided between father and daughter as the compositions dictate. A portion of the proceeds, I suggest 20%, will go to Lord Harrington as compensation for his involvement in bringing these works to light. Lord Harrington straightened in his chair. 20%? That's insulting. It's generous, considering the alternatives. Miles's voice hardened. The alternatives being exposure of your blackmail scheme, public humiliation, and potential legal consequences. A tense silence followed, broken finally by Lady Helena. Robert, is this true? Did you truly blackmail Samuel Keating and steal his daughter's work? Lord Harrington's shoulders slumped slightly. The gambling debts were overwhelming, Helena. I saw an opportunity to establish myself in a new field, to create a legacy beyond that of a failed gentleman. By stealing someone else's legacy. Helena's voice cracked with disappointment. I convinced myself it was justified. The manuscripts would never have been published otherwise, not with half of them composed by a woman. Lord Harrington glanced at Winifred. I told myself I was doing the musical world a favour, ensuring these compositions would be heard. How magnanimous, Mrs. Winters said dryly. Sir William cleared his throat. If I may offer an observation? The musical world is changing, slowly but perceptibly. While female composers remain rare, there is growing appreciation for innovative work regardless of its source. Miss Keating's compositions, based on what I heard last evening, possess qualities that transcend conventional prejudices. He turned to Winifred. I would be honoured to publish your work under your own name, my dear. Your father's reputation will lend initial credibility, but your talent will ultimately stand on its own merits. Winifred's eyes shone with unshed tears. Thank you, Sir William. That means more than I can express. Miles addressed Lord Harrington once more. Do you accept the terms? 20% of the proceeds, your name kept out of any public accounting of this affair, in exchange for relinquishing all claims to the manuscripts. After a long moment, Lord Harrington nodded. I accept. Excellent. Miles turned to Sir William. I trust you can draw up the necessary contracts. Indeed, indeed. Most exciting development. Most exciting. Sir William beamed at Winifred. We shall make you the toast of London's musical circles, my dear. As the details were finalized, Winifred caught Miles's eye across the room. The gratitude and affection in her gaze warmed him more than any public accolade ever could. The meeting concluded with signatures and handshakes, Lord Harrington departing immediately afterward with Lady Helena, whose disappointment was evident in every line of her body. Mrs. Winters embraced Winifred warmly, promising to assist with the organization and dating of the manuscripts. When only Miles, Winifred, and Sir William remained, the publisher raised an important question. There is the matter of Miss Keating's debut, Your Grace. A formal introduction to society as a composer requires patronage, connections. I intend to provide both, Miles said firmly. Sir William's eyebrows rose slightly. Most generous, Your Grace. Though some might question such particular attention to a young, unmarried lady of modest background. They needn't question for long. Miles moved to stand beside Winifred, taking her hand in his. Miss Keating has done me the honor of agreeing to become my Duchess. Sir William's jaw dropped momentarily before he recovered his composure. I see. Well. Most unexpected, but most gratifying. A Duchess who composes unprecedented, but certainly not unwelcome. Yes, most suitable arrangement all around. When Sir William had departed, still muttering about unprecedented developments and excellent publicity opportunities, Winifred turned to Miles with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. Your Duchess? I don't recall agreeing to any such arrangement, Your Grace. Didn't you? Miles raised her hand to his lips. I distinctly remember you saying you didn't want to hide anymore, not your music, and not your heart. That was hardly a proposal of marriage. No, it wasn't. Miles's expression grew serious as he lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hand. This, however, is. Winifred Keating, your music awakened something in me I thought long dormant, the capacity to feel deeply, to connect soul to soul with another person. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, my partner, my Duchess? Winifred looked down at him, her green eyes bright with emotion. You understand what this means? The scandal, the gossip, a duke marrying a music teacher will create talk that lasts for years. Let them talk. I've spent my life conforming to expectations, fulfilling duties inherited rather than chosen. This, you, would be my choice, my joy. Miles's grip tightened on her hand. Besides, by the time we marry, you'll be the most celebrated female composer in England. They'll say I married above my station. A laugh escaped her, bright and genuine. You're incorrigible. Is that a yes? Winifred tugged him to his feet, her expression softening. Yes, Miles Farnsworth. Yes, I will marry you, though God knows we are both mad to attempt it. The best compositions often break conventional rules, he murmured, drawing her into his arms. Why should our life together be any different? As his lips met hers, sealing their unconventional engagement, a new melody began forming in Winifred's mind, a triumphant piece full of joy and possibility, meant to be played not in midnight solitude, but in the bright light of day, with the world as her audience.